It is a great pleasure to welcome Conleth Hill and Fiona Bell from the Gate production of King Lear. Conleth is our King Lear, and Fiona is Kent, Lady Kent, in fact, in this particular production. I wonder if I could start by asking both of you to give us just a little sense of your individual characters in context. So who is Lear, who is Kent, what role do they play in the play itself? What can we say about them?
Okay, well,
I think you should start, seeing as you're Lear.
that's very kind of you. I think Lear is someone who's got to the end of his working life. He is very tired. He's very weary of dealing with all the business and all the court. And he decides that the best way to have his retirement is to divide equally his kingdom between his three daughters. I think his reason for doing this is that he thinks that if they've only got a third each, then no one will be more dominant than the other, etc., etc. But unfortunately, when giving out these pieces of land and titles, his youngest daughter does not give the answer that he wants. So he's basically thrown into a spin, and despite the best counsel of his best friends, he just ignores it and just, has that anger that he won't abate. Then throughout the course of the play, you see that he realizes he's made a mistake, and he has that to deal with, as well as his diminishing faculties and he does go a little bit out of his mind, and it's one of his greatest fears from the very beginning is that he will go out of his mind, and that's an inevitability that's waiting for him. So he kind of does have regrets about how he's lived his life, about how he's treated his youngest daughter, and how he's fallen for the flattery of his two eldest daughters. But he even goes beyond that into kind of social awareness when he's forced to be out on the moors or the heath, depending on your geography, and realizes that he hasn't looked after the poor and those that are less well off his whole life. And even in the midst of his madness, he has moments of lucidity where he realizes that justice even is not what it's made out to be. And he has that famous speech about the justice railing upon the poor simple thief, and how appearances are more important, particularly in court, than reality. He says about through tattered clothes, great vices do appear. It's easier to see a sinner in somebody less well dressed. And he says robes and furred gowns cover all. So he gets that awareness. And he has moments of redemption. He does get to make up with his youngest daughter and his friend Kent, who he banished. Before he, spoiler alert, dies. But it's just a fascinating journey, and it's a lovely journey to go on once you're on top of it. But I'd say that's basically where we find him.
Thanks, Conleth. And Fiona, Conleth's already said that Kent is the kind of the best friend, the counsellor. Could you just say a wee bit more about that?
I think Kent, maybe to a modern audience, might be hard to understand in some ways because of his, I'll say because their loyalty to the king. Yeah. And, at the end of the play, Kent says, well, I'll go and die now as well, because I don't want to be around without my master. And I think Kent is it's something that was truly Elizabethan and feudal, and in some ways is a cipher as a character, because I think because Kent ought, regardless of Lear's role, even when he's retired as king, as far as I am concerned, he will always be king, because a king is a God-given state. And so in our context, because it's a woman, I think it can be a woman because it's meant to be more pagan times. So, and there were female warriors, and there was much more women with power at that time, and that fits. Yeah. But then the kind of overall character is an Elizabethan construct, I think, in terms of how she also reflects, or they reflect, Lear's royalty the whole way through. I think that's
very interesting, the idea of the Elizabethan or Jacobean understanding of friendship being a little bit different from ours in a way, and particularly in the context of loyalty, as you're saying.
But also because of place of birth.
Yes.
Because you are born, your birthright is God-given. So if you're a peasant, you will will live and die a peasant, and you will live and die a king. And if we all know our places, then society will all work out as it should do. So it was brainwashing, but it was, it worked.
Exactly. But Kent is a kind of immovable part of the court.
Yes.
In that sense.
Because she has no doubt about her role.
Yes.
In the court and in Kent, and she never questions that right up to the end of her life, which we don't see, but we know she's going to go and, go off with that burning ship.
Yeah.
Right. And I wonder if I could ask you both maybe to say a little bit about how you got to your characters. These are complex characters, very complex in the case of King Lear. So what sort of process do you go through to arrive at your own internal understanding of who you are in that character?
Well, you have to wait until it's been edited, first of all, to know what you're playing with. But by and large, everything you could possibly need is on the page. We can't dig Shakespeare up and ask questions. We wouldn't need to dig them up, really. We could just do it through a Ouija board. But you don't have that, opportunity of questioning the writer. And then you have to allow for all kinds of additions throughout the years. We got rid of, intentionally, lots of the misogynist rubbish that's in there. That is evidently some later writer's addition. Yeah. And possibly Jacobite, or possibly even more purist than that. But how it came about was I was asked would I like to play him, and I went, well, I'll go and read it again, and I did, and I went, oh, okay, yeah, that's a challenge, but I do think everything I needed was on the page, and it's all an audience have really as well. You can't play knowledge, you can't play history per se. You have to just play the moment, and. He's a very volatile journey, and it's great fun to play when you're on top of it, but it took me a while to get on top of it.
But is it your feeling that there is more on the page in Shakespeare than there might be in other dramatists?
There's more clarity sometimes, because, there wasn't one bit one piece when I'm reading through the whole thing that I went, I don't understand what that means. To me, it's... I don't think I have a superior knowledge of Shakespearean talk or anything. I just think that's why he's still done nowadays, is because of that observation of human condition, which all great writers do, either to highlight it or to represent the underbelly. But he just has... I think why it's brilliant for young people is if you get the right play at the right age, they can, all's well that ends well. To be a teenager, I remember studying that and studying the unrequited love aspect of it, and how far would you go if you couldn't get who you wanted. That's right up there with their, I was going to say Walkmans, that's really aging myself. Their earbuds and everything else, it's so prevalent and relevant. And so I think that's his secret as a brilliant writer, is that observation of emotions that don't change over centuries. Everything else, fashions may change, even way of speaking may change, but that emotive recognition that he has, good and bad, is just so valuable, I think.
And of course, he's quite well into his career at the point where he comes to Lear as well, isn't he?
Right, I wasn't really aware of that.
He knows what he's doing comprehensively by this point.
Yeah, but weirdly as well is that they're not types.
Yes.
If you look at Macbeth, you look at Hamlet, you look at Lear, you look at Coriolanus, they're all different people with very different, Hamlet's a procrastinator. Macbeth's a realist. He realises that if he does what she wants him to do, that he's going to be a villain. And then you have Lear, who's just on this spiraling discovery of his world and the hypocrisy of it and the two-facedness of it, and all those things. So yeah, I think that's where my love of him as a writer comes from, is that observation.
Did you feel the same thing with Kent, Fiona, that it was there on the page for you,
No,
or were you trying to find?
Well, I don't get as much to
You
say
don't
as
get as
him,
much.
half as much. And also, Kent doesn't talk in much. There's not much verse for me. There's a lot of prose, I suppose. Yeah, and but yeah. So I think what was hard for me was going, well, what kind of is it? You can't get too bogged down in reality with Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Because you kind of go, well, so
How could he not?
what kind of woman would then go and dress up as Caius? And,
Yes, and how can he not recognise her?
Yeah, exactly. You just got to go with the fact that they can't recognise you. And so I think for me, finding it was about marrying the two. Yeah. So it started out that I just felt like I was a totally different character from Kent to Caius. Yeah. And it's actually just come through doing it that I go, oh God, there is much more subtlety here in terms of... I'm listening as Kent. I'm always listening as Kent. So and what I've actually found quite a lot of pleasure in this production, just listening, and as a discipline, even as an actor, and always reacting. And because my path is so clear, which is I just want to protect Lear, then everything is done to that end. Absolutely everything. Yeah. And that's where I kind of found it, and then kind of push the two together to find some kind of a reality through it.
Well, it's very, very interesting to hear you talk about the fact that you are really playing two characters, but they are the same character. That must be quite a tricky thing to master in a way.
Well, it's not tricky to master physically. Yeah. It's just to push it together in your head so that you feel comfortable playing it, and that you don't feel daft or because there is I don't want to pantomime element, but because there's a lot of talking to the audience and coming on and going, I'm in disguise, by the way, there is that pantomime quality, but you've always got to ground yourself and going, this is theatrical. Nobody's pretending this isn't a play, So in many ways, you've got to embrace that, because that's the license as well that Shakespeare gives you. It's a play.
And you marked it by accent in a way as well, Fiona. Was that a kind of conscious decision that you'd have one accent for one and one accent for the other?
Oh, yeah. And it was quite fortuitous that I quite like it. I don't know if anybody notices it but me, but Ryan, who plays Edmund, so he's Scottish, and he Kent... That's the first person Kent meets, apart from Gloucester. Yeah. And then I decide to go back to my Scottish accent, but the audience don't necessarily know I'm Scottish. So I just quite like it that it's like something's been planted. That's where I got the idea to go Scottish.
It's almost like a handoff.
Yes,
in a way. Conleth, can you bring you back a little bit to the business of playing Lear in a way? I mean, you're on the stage a lot. It's a physically very demanding role. I mean, not least in the fact that you have to carry Cordelia on stage at the end. And all of that, of course, is complicated by the fact of, what your age is, that you are an older man, you're playing an older man, and you have the physicality of carrying her. But also, such a range is demanded of the actor. So, in the early scenes, you're very dominant. There's a kind of alpha male swaggering thing going on, and you have to become somebody very different. And through that, of course, as you've already said, is the idea of his fear of madness and so on. Could you just talk a little bit about the challenge of doing all of that?
Yeah, I think it's like you say, it's quite clear that the first scene he's absolutely in charge, won't be questioned, won't go into discussion about anything. It's what I say goes. It's a totalitarian. What's that word for someone who rules solely?
Autocratic.
That, yep. And then he has to deal with daughters who, once they've got what they want or what they expected, suddenly go, now get rid of him. So this protection that he thought he'd set in place is falling to nothing. And I just love the way it develops, and that he starts off quite sure, and then there's a beautiful scene where the two daughters arrive together, where he's just bullied by both of them and Cornwall, and all his logic just seems to go out the window. You know, he's going, but we made this deal that you would allow me so many men, and you know, he said it publicly and he said it to them, and they're just going, you don't need that many. So it's his whole world, you know, it changes its axis for him, and he is stubborn. Like, he'll go, no, I would rather you know, have no roof than stay with somebody who didn't want me. And but again, it took a while to get on top of those, but once you are, it does the work for you, like all good scripts. And so if you can, you know, I think that's what I was always going for, was to get on top of it and just let it be fluid, because for a long time it wasn't, and it was very kind of, you know, oh, I'm not sure, you know, and hugely long scenes that seem to start in one place and end up in another. But it's all thrilling and really enjoyable to do, weirdly.
But I mean, you end in such a place of tenderness. I mean, that's kind of what struck me, you know, and particularly the scene with Gloucester, you know. Yeah. There's extraordinary tenderness.
Well, I think that's a moment of lucidity within the madness, you know, that he's able to go, I know who you are.
Yeah.
I know what you're going through, and I'm going through it as well, and we have to be patient, and you know. But yeah, I think I love that scene, and I love the scene in the hospital with Kent and Cordelia, where he thinks he knows them, but just because of what he's been going through, and by his own admission, my mind's not. I don't think it's right. That he's dealing with all this, and then to, you know, that's not hard to play. If you you know, imagine if you'd lost a child, you think you'd lost a child, and then you have them alive again. That's just joyful. So again, he does all the work for me, but it was just getting on top of those, and making, you know, he's amazing at stringing thoughts together. But because of the drive of the play and the way Lear talks, it isn't stop, think. It's just, you know, very well linked together. So I'm not being evasive, but again, I think he's done all the work for me once you've learnt how to read it and interpret it properly. But
it's amazing where you end up, given where you start from, it seems to me.
Yeah, but I think that's the joy of the part as well, that it isn't just a two-dimensional...
and it's a roller coaster, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like...
Yeah, it just goes crazier and crazier, and then he's gone for a while, and then he kind of comes back a bit.
Yeah.
And then I think he's, you know, probably most lucid in the second part, where even his acknowledgement of, you know, the difference from the first act when he's going to the full, let me not be mad, I don't want to be mad, you know, where he goes to his daughter, to be honest, I'm not on my right mind. So this kind of acceptance that...
But sometimes I feel like watching it, you're kind of like surfing.
Yes.
Do you know? Because the thoughts are coming so thick and fast. And opposing thoughts and opposing desires, and you're just going,
and shifting axes, you know, like, because that whole big scene where you're in the stocks and he comes on and finds you, and it goes from there to him questioning Gloucester about why his daughter won't come out to see him, to then his daughter coming out, to then his other daughter turning up. And so it just keeps going and going and going.
Being stripped of everything, and then we're on the heath.
And then, you know, the last thing he says before he leaves them is, "Oh, fool, I will go mad." So he knows it's coming.
You've both talked a little bit about the joy of doing Shakespeare, really. And I wonder, I mean, do you feel, and I'm sure I know the answer to this in advance, but do you feel it's worthwhile doing Shakespeare now? And do you feel it's worthwhile doing Shakespeare in a country like Ireland, a country that has maybe a slightly complicated relationship with Shakespeare as a playwright?
I don't think we have with Shakespeare, because we acknowledge the quality, and we've given them enough good writers over the years, so it's only fair that, you know, I wouldn't be one of those who would claim him as Irish or whatever, but interestingly, I think the regional accents that we all choose to use in this production would have been closer to how the Shakespeareans would have spoken than would be kind of RP.
Yes. Certainly Ulster accents. Would be
Yeah,
classic,
well,
sure.
we also, there used to be because it's pre-pagan and everything else, or pre-Christian, sorry, the whole Dalriada kingdom, which, if you're a history buff, you could look up. There was the whole West Island and Highlands and Islands of Scotland and the whole northeast of Ireland were one kingdom. So that didn't seem like out of joint to have these different Scottish and Irish accents within. We had a Welsh man last week, but Chris was standing in for.
I think it's probably more
maternity
modern
leave.
perceptions, isn't it, of Shakespeare, and when it was probably, I don't know, culturally appropriated by the southeast of England, because I always get the feeling that Shakespeare, I don't know where I'm getting this feeling from, that he wouldn't have been that. He'd been much more egalitarian, do you know? And would just have been delighted that people just kept doing the plays. Yeah. I think, for me, it's important to do plays that are this old and going right back, Greeks as everything, is that it's always just a constant surprise that people were just the same.
Yeah.
And that we always think we're so unique and so we've moved on and we're so sophisticated and we have all these gadgets and everything. But actually, I think it's really good to remind ourselves all the time, and certainly people coming up, that human nature has not changed that much, do you know? And I think that's just, that's what's joyful about it. Yeah. And especially when you get the humour in it. Yeah. I think there's a lot of humour in King Lear. There's a lot of daftness in it. Yeah. And I think the kids get that when they come to see it. The students come to see it.
Yeah, I think that, I find it with students that they don't get the humour on the page terribly much. No. But if you show them a production, then they can see why it's funny. Then they get the humour in it. Yeah. As you've mentioned, students there, we will, of course, have many students probably looking at this video. And I wonder if I can ask you, do you have any tips for things they should be thinking about in relation to the play, or an advice for students who are studying the play, many of them for their school leaving exam?
I don't know. I think I would come back to what Conleth said at the beginning. It's all there to be seen. It's not hidden what it's about. There's a reason that blindness comes up a lot in the play. We're all blind to our own motives and each other's motives throughout the play.
And power. And the abuse of power.
And hubris. And
also even the social observations about illegitimacy.
Yes.
You didn't talk about that then, let alone celebrate it or have that as a power grab between the two brothers, or from Edmund to Edgar. But there's lots in it, it's not just Lear and the daughters. Like you say, you have this Gloucester family who are, he's as bad as any of them, that Edmund. And then you've got Kent, and you have the daughters and their husbands, and how Albany is a good man and stays good the whole way through, whereas Cornwall's quite happy to jump into the revolt with them. I think that's, I don't know, I just remember doing All's Well as a teenager, and that when you study literature and you kind of make the links for yourself rather than the teacher telling you this is written, like East of Eden would be about the Garden of Eden or whatever, but that you get them yourselves. And so I think there's still that opportunity for kids, young people, reading it to go, oh, I get that. I get exactly what he means, or, how they feel, or it's all in there, as you say,
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this is just a bit off the cuff, but it'd be interesting for them to have a transcript of our production, because Roxana has stripped away a lot of maybe what isn't required and stuff that you can get bogged down in, and I think why the production works is this: it's very direct and it tells a good linear story, well, two linear stories, and so I suppose don't get bogged down in stuff that you don't have to, and maybe that's something your teacher should be able to go, like, these are the main trajectories, and that's what you saw in this production.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a great piece of advice, not to get bogged down in things too much. So perhaps we might wrap things up with that. Thank you so much, Conleth and Fiona. It was a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.